Hey there, I'm Brian, this is Scott, and this is Be Rad for Jesus.
Be rad.
For Jesus! See,
Like,
okay.
are we, am I a heretic if I don't say for Jesus? Be rad. Jesus.
Yes, you are.
Churches start whispering his name.
My goodness. His name's Yeshua. Yahusha. You know, like,
Yahweh Amne Shue.
oh my gosh. Yeah. Ig Peatenle. All right. That's what it starts sounding like. Ugh, you gotta know the secret codes, otherwise the Lord can't hear your prayers. Gnosticism. Okay. So today we have a really awesome interview. It's a lot of fun and a great story and great testimony. An acquaintance of mine. I would like to call him friend. I don't know if he would refer to me as that, but we're going to claim it. A guy named Sam Moss.
Name it and claim it, baby.
Yeah. He runs a podcast called Group Chronicles, and it has just blown up. And all he does is he gets listener submitted stories. He started collecting them in youth ministry forums, and he just reads crazy stories from youth ministry, like your biggest fails, your most embarrassing moments, like the dumbest thing you've ever said on stage, like all these kinds of things. And he's just got a couple of friends who like are blind reacting to each of these stories. And it is hilarious and it's blown up, and I'm stoked for him. And it is wonderful. Like my kids subscribe to it because they think it's hilarious. And, you know, then they get to hear all this stuff. They're like, Dad, did you ever do something like this? And I'm like, no.
Totally. Oh.
I knew people like that, so I didn't do that because I was like, heard the story, learned the lesson. But I mean, they've got everything from like mega goldfish fails to, you know, like kids pooping on buses and in vans and all sorts of other, you know, saying inappropriate things by accident, switching the words around and that kind of thing. So Scott, you have preached, you have been part of church for a while now. And so as we were talking about all these kinds of things with Sam, my question to you is, what, I'm going to have to cut this because I'm dumb and I can't ask questions. Words don't work. My question to you is, what's like one of the craziest or most embarrassing things that you've ever encountered connected to church, like within a church setting or a church retreat or something else? Like, what's the craziest thing that's happened to you?
That's a good question. I don't know. There's not many. I feel like it's just regular human stuff for the most part.
Or like the dumbest thing you've said on stage, because you've led worship and preached.
Oh, I say dumb things every time that I have to do hosting. So we have a host position that just kind of comes up and does the announcements after, or, you know, and whatever after worship. And I say dumb stuff all the time. My church's name is Humanity, which, you know, is not New Age. I always say that.
Yeah.
But I said I put the huma in humanity, so that was cringy. I've said all kinds of dumb things from the stage.
Oh my gosh!
If something doesn't land, then joke, I will do this and go, never say that again. You know?
Yeah. I had a pastor who would always, like, if he told a joke that flopped, he would always say, "These are the only jokes I brought, people. You're gonna have to laugh at one of them."
Right. Yeah. Okay, I can think of one now. There was at Covina Assembly where we used to go, one of the pastors, we were welcoming a new like connections pastor or some kind of, you know, mega church position that shouldn't exist. Sorry. Just kidding. But we were welcoming a new pastor, and his name was Todd Black, and from the pulpit, it was a very diverse church. So there was lots of races, lots of skin colors, lots of backgrounds. It was
lots of races, not racists.
Yeah, races. And they said, you know, we'd like to welcome the Black family. And Todd Black is white, but he was sitting like near a family that is Black. And so everybody was like,
yeah,
like there's more than one. What do you know?
Did you hear Mike's response? when they did that, he turned, he was like, "It's not me." Because our friend Mike was part of the family who is black, who was sitting near enough
It's not me.
that everyone was looking at that. Who's like, "It's not me."
So
And
it
then,
was,
this like very, very white family stands up and everyone's like, "Oh, yeah."
oh yeah.
And
So
then
that wasn't necessarily cringy, but it was just kind of hilarious because it was,
yeah.
it was
Well,
just
that pastor who made that announcement was always looking for like the edgy joke he could make that would have some sort of insinuation, especially like if you weren't paying attention, but it was innocent on his part. Like, I mean, I remember hearing everybody talk about how he would, or how often he would do things like this. And one of the times they had a singing group, because this is kind of an old school church. And so for one of their like Sunday night revival kind of things, they had a singing group it was a family called the Fuggins, Fuggin. And he just found every way to turn that into, he just made that into
the whole Fuggin family.
An adjective. Yeah. Like, can we just get, that was such a great Fuggin concert. Can we just have, why don't we have them up here one more time? Let's hear one more great Fuggin
For the
song.
Fuggins.
Yeah.
We need another Fuggin song.
Yeah, just okay. That's enough. Somebody bring out the hook and get this guy off the microphone.
Yeah, but you can't not do that.
No.
The
jokes write themselves.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's the cringiest thing I've ever said. So there's my submission, or there's everything and anything I've ever heard.
Yeah, I've said and done some crazy things, and I share a story I shared a story that made it on his podcast, and we talked about it in the interview. So I'll leave that little tidbit until you listen to the interview
check it out
right now. Yeah, because go check it out. But another one that I'm super not proud of, but this kid still loved me and it was good times. But one of the first times, it was at Covina, one of the first times I got to lead a lock-in with a bunch of high school guys. We were playing Ultimate Frisbee in the gym. And you remember the walls in the FLC over there had which was the Family Life Center. I think that's what that stood for. I don't know. The FLC.
It was a prison.
Yeah, and it looked like a prison. It was like this huge brick building that had all the gates or all the windows had gates and bars on them, and then the interior of it was like a basketball court that was carpeted, so it was like the real springy kind of carpet, and then it had the pillars on the wall that came out every 8 to 10 feet. There was a pillar sticking out of the wall. And it was all lined with brick, like coarse, rough brick. And, these things would be like maybe 10, 12 inches across and every 10 or 12 feet or so. And so there were these sharp corners sticking out of the wall all over the place. Well, it's 2 a.m. and we're playing Ultimate Frisbee. And I went up and I just shoulder checked this kid into the wall. And he just took a corner of the brick with his face and chipped a tooth.
Yeah. And we can't discuss the rest of the details because the litigation is ongoing.
No, this was 20 years ago. But man,
past the statute of limitations.
And he was he was like, dude, no, I love you, man. It's all good. We were fine. He was fine. And I followed up. I made sure he didn't care. It was no big deal. But dang, man. Oh my gosh, I almost killed a kid. Because he was laid out. He wasn't unconscious, but I definitely laid him out on the floor. So it was a little nuts. Anyway, so youth ministry do be crazy sometimes. But listen to the podcast with Sam Moss of the Youth Group Chronicles podcast and a whole bunch of other things. Can't wait for you to hear it. Welcome to the B-Rad for Jesus podcast. Today I am here with Sam Moss, who is known on social medias as Sam T. Moss, if I have that correct. And this guy has an awesome podcast, which I highly recommend. Y'all should go check that one out when you're done listening to this, called Youth Group Chronicles, where they read out some hilarious stories of fails, ridiculous moments, and other things in youth ministry, and in general, just have a good time. Sam, welcome to the B-Rad for Jesus podcast, man.
Thanks so much for the invite. Honored to be here and
Yeah.
appreciate you bringing me onto the show.
Ah, that was the wrong time to take a sip of coffee. Okay.
Well, I left you hanging.
No, that's all right. So, Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Sam Moss?
Yeah, so my name is Sam Moss, as you know. I live in upstate New York. My wife and I have two kids, two little girls under, well, not sure when this will come out, but right now under the age of 2. So life is a little crazy, but
Wait, do you have
her and
twins?
I, no, the one
Okay.
is 2, and then the other one was born a couple months ago, or
Oh
a
wow.
month.
Okay.
Yep. So a 1, almost 2-year-old, and then a newborn. So life is a little crazy, but we're getting it done. And like you mentioned before, I run a podcast called Youth Group Chronicles. Um, I mean, man, if you have really spent any time in ministry, youth ministry, or even if you don't go to church and you're listening to this, I've had people reach out and be like, "This is like crazy. I showed this to my unsaved friends, and like this is hilarious to them."
Yeah.
I think like the Christian realm is missing some comedy, and we kind of fit that mold, which I think is really awesome, and it's wholesome for the most part.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to cuss, but there's some
Most part.
ratchet stories on there.
There are.
We keep it saved, but it's there's some crazy things that happen, and it's kind
Yeah.
of funny stuff that you just have to laugh at. But outside of that, my wife and I are entrepreneurs, so we both run our own businesses, and
Nice.
that's our life in a nutshell.
Sweet. What are your businesses? What's the nature of those?
So I run a web development company. So we do website redesigns and development for typically like larger tech companies. So we don't really do a lot of work for small businesses, but like the Silicon Valley SaaS startups and stuff like that. And then my
Wow.
wife owns a luxury newborn and maternity studio here at a local
Wow.
mall. And yeah, so that keeps us pretty busy.
Nice. The baby photography. All right. So you guys must have like the best photos of your own kids, right? Like,
I would say so. Yes,
yeah.
it's funny. So my wife used to do wedding photography, and she
Mm,
was making a name for herself, doing really well. And then she had our daughter Olive a couple of years ago, and didn't want to be gone every weekend in the summer and
right.
for 8, 10 hours, 12 hours on end. So she made a shift and started taking some pictures of babies and was like, you know what, this is something I could do. And
Yeah.
she like went from 0 to 100 skill wise overnight. It was pretty insane. I guess once you kind of
Nice.
like understand photography, I'm not a photographer, so
Yeah.
she did pretty good with that, and that's all she does now. So it's a lot
Nice.
easier on her schedule, and more family time.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I was never that great at taking photos of people. I was a
Same here.
photography major when I first got started in
Oh, no way.
college. And yeah, was never that great at the portrait side of things. I don't know what it was. Like, I'm a pastor. I like being around people. I'm good with people, but the getting the right pose and the right expressions and all of that just never quite worked for me. I was much
Hmm.
more felt more qualified at doing sports and landscape stuff. I was really into snowboarding and skateboarding, and so I, was like, oh, I'll go and do this, and
Do some
then I
like
wasn't
cool
that good at
action
that either.
shots, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that was more my jam, and then the call to ministry sort of derailed that whole plan. And,
Hey, I've heard it happen a lot, and
but
that's totally cool.
yeah, so what's your connection to the church now? Because you have this youth group Chronicles podcast. So
Hmm.
obviously there's some youth ministry connections there, and you've got oftentimes people from your church as guests or fellow other youth pastors and whatnot. And so many hilarious people. Like I'm like, dude, I want to know these people. They're
Yeah.
so good,
Or not.
or
No, I'm just
not.
playing. They're all good people. They're fun to be around. I'll just say that.
Yeah, yeah. So what's your connection and role? How do you currently connect or serve with the
Yeah.
church?
So right now in ministry, I am on our worship team, and that is pretty much what I do for ministry right now. So I play lead guitar at my church, and as for like ministry experience, I've been in ministry since I was like 8. So I got a job playing drums when I was
Nice.
8. My parents lived at a Christian camp growing up. Uh, I think we moved there when I was like probably 6 or 7.
Oh
So they
wow.
were full time ministry my whole life, and grew up in the church, which is really cool, and then served in youth ministry, probably 3 or 4 years up
Mhm.
until we had our first daughter, and then it was solely focusing on the worship side of things and the music side of things. And then also I do live production for a conference that our church puts on. So I'm on the planning team for a youth conference that we put on. So I do still dabble a bit in the youth ministry
Super
side of
cool.
things, but it's more laid back. Because people are just like, oh, are you a youth pastor? I'm like, no, never was a youth pastor. I was a leader and, have had a lot of exposure to it and experience with it. But man, youth pastors, the one thing I've learned about this podcast is you all are like way underpaid. I'll just say that right now.
Yeah, it's
The
not
stuff
the
you have to
most.
deal with.
Yeah, I know some of that stuff. It's like there's not enough money to make that moment worth
No,
it.
you have to be called, man. You have to be absolutely called.
Absolutely. And there's so much, all the good youth ministry stuff out there at some point comes back to just really solidify that calling, write it down in like 80 different places. Cause there will be days where you were just like, really, why am I doing this? And then, the calling. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Jesus said so. I guess I gotta keep it up. But yeah, I was in youth ministry for 20 years and, it has its moments.
Yes.
But
listen
it's
to
also
Youth Group
hilarious.
Chronicles, and you'll realize that you might not have it so bad. That's something I've realized is people will reach out and they're like, "Dang, like my kids are angels compared to what I'm hearing on this show," and it's like really encouraging to me because I thought they were like the worst. I'm like, no, like nothing surprises me anymore as I'm reading these stories. So I can imagine someone listening to the show. It's like, oh, okay, we're doing all right.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's that way with a lot of things, though, because, with youth ministry for sure, I think networking and getting to know other youth ministers and being part of some of the Facebook groups and that kind of thing, as that was like really blown up huge, really helped me find some common ground and whatnot, especially when I moved from being a like really involved volunteer to like being in charge of it. And then it was like, oh man, I don't have somebody to go to and be like, hey, this just happened. You deal with it. Now
You're
it's like,
you're
man,
the guy now.
I'm the guy. Yeah. So now people are coming to me with that stuff. I'm like, wait, what? and finding other youth pastors that had been through things. But I mean, I went through that all again shortly after, because my first job in youth ministry, our kids were born. I have twins and they were born like 6 months into it. And I remember feeling like I am the worst parent alive. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. How are these things supposed to survive me? I don't know why God would let this happen to them, that I would be their dad. I'm so inept and unqualified to keep them alive. And finding things like, ridiculous dad stories on Twitter and whatnot, and go,
it helps.
Oh,
right?
okay. That wasn't that bad. All right. Like when the baby had a blowout diaper on us, like in public, where we had nowhere to go, like we're hours
normal.
away. Yeah.
I'd be
Everyone's
concerned
like,
if that didn't
that
happen
happens.
at this point.
Right. Exactly. So you grew up in church and you grew up at a Christian camp. How long did you guys live there growing up?
So we moved there in 2005. So I was 7 or 8.
2005.
2005. 2005. And then I got married in 2016 and moved an hour north to upstate New York. So the campus in PA. And my parents lived there for another year and then actually launched a ministry in the city that I'm in now. Which they help the homeless and mothers, single mothers and,
cool.
and stuff like that. So the camp, probably 15 years for me, roughly.
Wow. So you lived there
13,
until
15.
you like got married and moved away?
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't recommend. I recommend, to all the people that aren't married yet,
That's funny.
one of you, preferably both of you, should live on your own, not together, people. That's not what I'm saying. Live on your own and take the bachelor life away from the parents for a little bit. Thankfully, It was an okay adjustment for me. But my wife spent 6 months living in an apartment and kind of figured things out and lived on her own for a little bit. So I don't recommend going straight from mom and dad's house to marriage, but it happens.
Right. That's
I got married young though, so I guess that has something to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. That I don't know, man. In a way, you could make the case that it was a little more biblical, maybe.
Yeah, you're right.
Should have built an addition on your
was a lot
parents'
cheaper.
house.
I'll say that. That
Right.
Financially, way less of a burden.
Yeah. So in that time, what would you say is the biggest moment where growing up around the church, I'm sure it's kind of one of those like, well, I don't know. I mean, I was birthed in a pew and I was
Right.
raised, and so I was baptized at that moment and, loved Jesus ever since. But when would you say that God did something radically different in your heart where you knew like, okay,
hmm
I'm here for Jesus, and that's, I am a Christian, and Jesus is my Lord and Savior.
Yeah, I think for people in the church that have grown up in the church, it's probably hard for them to be like, no, this is the day. But for me, I don't know the exact date, but I remember the moment. I got saved when I was about 6 years old in my bunk beds. My parents were just talking about it. I'm like, I want that. Like this is mine now. And have not walked away since that. There's not been a time in my life where I'm like, took a sideways path. It's
Mm,
been, what, following the Lord since then, which I think is a testimony itself. And yeah, it's not like this out on a mountaintop crazy experience. It was something really simple, but I do have
that's
that
awesome.
moment that I can remember, which I think is really important.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. So what do you remember what it was? Because you said your parents were talking about it one night and you were like, yeah, I want that. Like, what about it seemed like, yeah, that's the thing?
I think the biggest thing was like I saw my parents living it. And again, I was pretty
Mm,
young. Thankfully, I've been able to
yeah,
hold on to it and realize that was a moment. But I think the biggest thing was like, oh, I want this for myself. I see my parents living out this Christian life, and now it's time for me to make the decision of yes, I want the Lord in my heart. I think that's what I remember the most is like, yeah, Jesus is going to be in my heart. As simple as that sounds as a little kid, and that's what I really grabbed onto and took for myself. And
that's
the cool
awesome.
thing is we've been able to live it out ever since.
Yeah, that's super cool, man. I love hearing that kind of stuff. Being like I didn't get saved till I was 21, so it
Mhm.
took me a long time getting into it. And I was going to church for a couple years, sort of figuring it out, and spent a long time kind of claiming, but not really there, and didn't really get it. And it was
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'm into Jesus, but also like everything else. Um, and then to raise my kids, like they were literally born into, my
Yeah,
ministry.
it's different,
Like
right?
the
Yeah,
first people who watched my kids were youth kids and youth leaders that I had.
it
So
sounds all too familiar.
yeah, so it's very different experience from what I had growing
Mhm.
up, and then it's like, man, I knew a lot of really crazy PKs. I hope that my kids turn out to actually just love Jesus and not be crazy rebellious party animals
Mhm.
who, everyone's like, oh no, not them. So
Well, for your
so far
sake,
so good.
there are a lot of PKs that I know that are serving the Lord. For example, at our
Mm,
church, our pastor has three kids. Uh, one of them is a campus pastor. One of them
mm,
was formerly the youth pastor, now is more of like an associate pastor. And then the
nice.
other one, she's not a pastor, but she works in admin in the church. All are serving the Lord, so you have nothing to worry about.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, hope so. So so you do doing web design with tech startups and that kind of thing. Silicon Valley, like not Christian stuff. Like I was when you were
Mm.
like, yeah, we do web design, and usually for bigger. And I was waiting to hear like mega churches, like I'll run Clover sites or whatever, like a Christian web design company. But it's not. That's not what you said. And so I'm curious how that being in a world that's not directly connected to the church, even stuff, let's be honest, even stuff that is directly connected to the church,
hmm
you encounter a lot of stuff where people don't act like they know Jesus. But
Yeah.
like in Silicon Valley, tech startups, like secular industry, I know there are Christians and stuff, but at the same time, there are values and things that tend to elevate themselves in life that
hmm
have nothing to do with Jesus or a real Christian worldview. So, my question after all of that setup is, what's the where do you see the biggest like divergence between like here's where I find myself being different or countercultural or called to some way different way of handling stuff because of Jesus, that like if it wasn't for Jesus I'd be going this way, but following Christ calls me to be different from a lot of the people around me or the general pull of the
hmm
industry around me.
I would say immediately what comes to the top of my mind is the language that I use.
Yeah.
So I don't cuss, I don't swear, and that is immediately noticed by people
Mm-hmm.
in the professional world because they kind of start to realize like, oh, there's something different. So in the
Mm-hmm.
professional world, it's like I also run a podcast there, and they'll come on the show, and if they want to cuss, like that's cool. right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's if they're going to do that, that is okay with me. I'm not going to be like, hey, don't do that. They're not
Right.
saved. They don't know any different.
Yeah.
But they do notice that I don't respond to it and be like, oh yeah, F that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of that. The same thing growing up as I noticed, like when I was playing sports for the high
Mm.
school, it was, all the kids, they would call me the team priest. So they would like, they'd want me to pray before
Yeah.
a game or whatever. And they noticed like they would try to get me to cuss in
Mm.
fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And then they would
Mm.
respect that. And I think that's the biggest thing and the easiest thing that a Christian can do is just control their mouth
Mm.
and just be like, if you tell someone that you're a Christian, like they should know by the way that you're talking, that is 100% true. Even now, when I go to the gym,
Mm-hmm.
man, it's like a cesspool when it comes to that kind of crap. But like, you keep your head straight forward and you talk, you have good character,
Yeah.
and people notice. And that's the most relevant one is, even at a gym with people I don't know, um, they'll
Yeah.
never hear me say anything like that. I think that's the
Mm.
biggest thing for me is, and really the easiest for people to be like, oh, there's something different because it's so prevalent right now. And I
Right.
think it's something really important.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. I think, um, as I think about it too, and even just hearing what you're saying, I think it's so much more than just not and maybe, agree or disagree. But it would seem like it's not just the language itself,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the content of the speech
Yeah.
as well. Right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's the fact that you're, talking and it's like at the gym, like it's not just like, oh, you didn't just say like, dang, that girl looks, or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
you avoided that whole topic and changed the
Exactly.
subject or like hit something different. Like there's an entire just category that's just not engaged there of
Mm-hmm.
the way you talk, the words you
You
say
just
to
rise
describe
above,
things.
the
Yeah.
conversation. 100. And it's not, a lot of people are just like, yo, I hope this doesn't offend you. They catch on. And the first
Right.
thing they'll say is like, I hope this doesn't offend you that I cuss. And I'm like, look, I am like one of the most thick-skinned guys. You can say whatever you want to my face, around me. I really don't care. Like, you're not going to offend me. And
Nice.
it's, they can do what they want, but they start to actually take it for themselves is
Mm.
what I've noticed. Is like the more you hang out with these people in a class or whatever it is, or professionally, it's really interesting the influence that you can have.
Right.
And the thing is, they're gonna catch on that you go to church, you're a
Mm-hmm.
Christian, right?
Right.
And they're looking for you to trip up. They might
Yeah.
not set a trap, but they're like watching, right?
Yeah.
And they're gonna use any excuse they can to disqualify you and Christianity as a whole.
Right.
So if they hear you talking about X, or you slip up and you cuss, or you put yourself in a bad situation, they're always watching. And then it's, oh, you know what a fraud. You know what? See, Christians are just
Exactly.
fake.
Yeah. Man, I had that. I messed that up so bad when early on in my faith. And I mean, all things are forgivable, but at the same time, I think it was a really, I think it was a huge fail. I was, I had been into drinking and everything when I was younger, and then I
Mm-hmm.
quit and, followed Jesus and was like, no, not at all. And then kind of was doing like, well, not really, but then once in a while, but nothing crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I, usage of alcohol as a Christian, debatable. I find that, in moderation, there's grounds or allowance for it. But aside from that, at this time, I was saying like, absolutely not. I don't do any of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff because I'd been around it, and I was working at a skate shop at the time that was like in a downtown area where like, it's like a couple of stores and lots of bars.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of, like it's all walking across the street and everything. So like people just everywhere stumbling around drunk every night. And all the guys I worked with trying to get me to come out every night.
Yeah.
And I'm like, finally, I'm like, man, I think I should go out with these guys because like they don't think I'm that cool. Like I want to be
Mm-hmm.
cool, and they're going to give up on trying to hang out with me. Like they're trying to hang out with me. I should go, And I go out and I get trashed, and then the next day show up at work, and one of the guys is like, I knew it. I knew you were full of crap, and the whole thing was just BS. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, I screwed that up so bad.
Yeah.
Like it was so much better. And that's when I realized like exactly what you were saying, that like
Mm-hmm.
that it might even seem like a trap at times.
Yeah.
Like they were totally baiting me to see if I would fail. But what they were looking for was not hoping I would fail. There was so much disappointment in that guy. Like it was this huge letdown because he was like, oh, I was hoping there was actually something different.
Yeah.
I was hoping that there was something different from what I live out. And I realized, no, you're just exactly the same as me. No difference. And I mean, I didn't do the same kinds of thing. I wasn't doing everything that they were doing, but
But it's crazy how
it was enough.
one incident is all they need. And it can be something as simple as gossip. One thing I've noticed, and I'm really intentional about, is just step away from the conversations that involve others that really they shouldn't be happening, right?
Yeah.
And my pastor says it really well. He's like, if someone's coming to you with gossip, it's because they're looking to like throw up on you, and you're just there with a garbage can to catch it. So walk away. Like, become the person that like they would never come to you. Obviously, they're coming to you for a reason. So it might happen once or twice, but walk away. And it's, again, at the gym, it's like everybody talks about everybody when someone walks out the door. And I've made it like really clear. I've even been kind of blunt because I've gotten to know a few people. I'm just like, you guys talk about me like this when I walk out the door.
Yeah.
Just to kind of like, be like, oh crap, we are kind of being like jerks about this.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be like better than them, but that's like something that can really show up if you're just talking trash about someone behind their back. That's another thing they're going to nitpick and be like, yeah, you know what? Just like us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that, and I mean, and that one in particular is, something that like biblically it's mentioned multiple times in ways that, establish pretty clearly that it's a big deal. But then even more the way that it does tear people down and to avoid it and to stay out of it shows that you are about something different and something better and here for the kinds of things that you want to be able to claim about following Jesus, right? Like, no, I'm here for, spreading light and bringing people up and, coming alongside like Jesus and lifting people up from stuff, not looking for extra ways to tear them down and rip them down. So speaking of that, spill the tea on all the guys that you've been on. No, just,
you wouldn't believe what,
I know. What's Isaiah really like? No, he's one of the guys that shows up on your Youth Group Chronicles podcast.
I will say, the people that we bring on the show are personal friends of mine. They go to our church, and I will say the character of every single person on the show is incredible. I think that's something that's really cool. And like we read some crazy stories. Like I said, we don't cuss on the show. We're not terrible. There are just some stories that might be a little inappropriate for some, but like as youth pastors and adults, it's like, dang, that actually I could totally see that happening. It's funny to laugh at. But the character of the people on the show, second to none. And it's Isaiah, for example, absolutely hilarious, super fun guy to be around. So it's really cool, the opportunity that I have.
Right. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things on there. I've noticed a bit lately. I feel like there were 3 or 4 different episodes where it's like you almost need like another segment, like Sam's learning a new word, because some of these stories, like bringing up stuff, you're like, I didn't know what a brothel was. Like, what?
Yeah, I had to look it up. Seriously, as I'm like doing these stories, there are legitimate times I will copy and paste a word into like Google. Either that or Urban Dictionary, and just be like, how do I pronounce this, or what was actually supposed to be funny here? And I'm like, oh yeah. So that's another thing. I grew up 100% homeschooled, and definitely had some access to the world for sure with sports and stuff, but overall pretty sheltered. So it's funny now to be like, I don't know what a brothel is. Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I live in Nevada, so we're the one place.
Pretty common, right? Okay.
Yeah, like there's literally they advertise on the radio here on public radio. It's insane.
Oh my goodness! Wow,
like
that's crazy.
Is that legal? That shouldn't be legal. My kids are in the car. What are you doing? Like, this is not okay. But dude, so what are so I'm curious. So you were involved in youth ministry. You have another tech podcast, you said, or something about that industry. Yeah. So what got you started? How did you find yourself like, you know what? These are so crazy. We should read these stories out or get a podcast going. Like, how did that come together?
There's a couple of different things that happened. The first one is I'm good friends with our youth pastor, he's now the associate pastor, Pastor Cody. And there was just stories that he had said in passing that I thought were hilarious. He's just like, there's these kids that brought like, I know this youth pastor, they set up fireworks in the church bus and like held up like help me signs. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more out there. And then from there, I was just like, I had seen on TikTok some it was like podcasts or channels where they would basically just read off stories, and the vibe of those was one of them I thought was pretty interesting was like true crime. So they would read like
Yeah.
old crime stories and just like conversational, kind of like we do our podcast. So I loved that format of the content's already created, because it's a lot of work to create content and get all the information for a show, as running your own podcast. Another one I saw was they would like read crazy relationship stories. This is all like worldly secular podcasts, but it was they were like, am I the jerk for doing this to my girlfriend? And then people would comment. And I thought the format was genius and people ate it up.
Right.
So fast forward, I was sitting in my parents' living room with a couple friends, and I was like, man, someone needs to do a youth ministry podcast about like just reading crazy stories.
Just fails.
Just fails, crazy stories, whatever it may be. I'm sure there's got to be like forums and chat threads of all these kind of things, because I only had a couple off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, there's really no excuse. Like, I know what I'm doing when it comes to a podcast. Maybe I should try this. So I was like, you know what? I really think this is a cool idea. There's really nothing like it. Especially even really in like the Christian space. I haven't seen this pulled off. So I'm like, this could really go somewhere. So I set it all up, started a little podcast. Pastor Cody added me to a couple of youth pastor groups.
Nice.
And I just started searching the threads, and I'm like, or Facebook groups. And I started searching the posts in there, and I stumbled across some threads that had maybe 150, 300 comments, something crazy. Just started pulling the stories and telling people, hey, like, I want to put you on our show with the story. Like, here's the link. And people started eating it up. So from there, it snowballed. People email us stories. We have hundreds of stories that people have emailed in. I'm in quite a few Facebook groups now, so I'll post every once in a while and just say, hey, what's your craziest youth ministry fail, or what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened? That's a new segment that's going to be coming out here on some future episodes. I think I framed it. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you while serving in youth ministry?
Yeah. Not to get my stories elevated, but I did comment on that.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So you saw that one coming. Actually, you know what? Yes, I do remember your story. It's going to get featured because I laughed so hard. Was it the paintball one?
Yeah.
Okay, dude, that was freaking hilarious.
Dude, like you have, so you gotta, I'm gonna tease just a little bit of it so that we can talk about it, but I'll leave it to people. Go check out the Youth Group Chronicles podcast, and at some point
you'll be hearing it soon. Yeah, one
it's
of these
worth listening to. Regardless, like
just for that story.
We were on a road trip, and my kids, like, I just put that on because we lost reception. We were going over mountains, and I was like, dang, man, like, I don't want to just listen to the same. We've had the same worship CD in our car, this one CD for like 6 months. So I'm like, okay, we need something else. So I plugged in the podcast. And I'm like, what podcast do I listen to that my kids can hear because they're in 7th grade? And so I was like, oh, the Youth Group Chronicles podcast. This is perfect. And so I put that on.
Awesome.
And I mean, we were dying. They were like, are there more? And I'm like, I think we listened to every episode already. Like,
that's hilarious. And, there's more to come, guys. Don't worry.
But so it is totally worth it. Go binge that entire show. But a few years back, at middle school camp, they had a paintball course, and one of our boys wore cargo shorts and and apparently baggy boxers too, and was crouched down, like looking to. And one of my leaders came around, and he's like a little too aggro, one of those guys who's like kind of out to hurt the kids, when you're playing the games. Excuse me. And he comes around, he shoots the kid, and the kid just drops to the ground. And he was like, oh, he didn't put his gun up, so he like walked around and like shot him in the back, like put a line of paint up his back. Oh, and we're like, what were you thinking? This kid's like, 12 years old. Like, why? That aside, but the kid passed out because he reaches up. The paintball didn't pop. And so he reaches in and thinks it's something else, like loose. And he's like, oh, and was done. And then the number of times, like, I have done a lot of hospital visits with kids. Like, I've been around youth ministry a lot. And we had a big youth group at my last church. And I had a lot of ER visits and various things that I had to deal with. And I mean, I had kid break an arm and get bit by a spider and worried about death and like all this craziness. And this time I go to the hospital, like it never occurred to me how many times I have to like mark down what the injury was and all of that and what the result was. And to hear like the doctor, like I'm standing on the other side of the curtain and the doctor's like checking this kid out because we had to he was in so much pain, and he talked to his mom and she's like, yeah, you better take him. And she's like trying not to laugh. She's like, I feel bad, but also like, this is ridiculous.
This is freaking hilarious.
Yeah. And to hear the doctor go, well, that's a paintball welt, all right. Never thought I'd see one right there. That's impressive.
That's hilarious. Dude, when I read that, dude, I lost it. That has to be one of my favorite ones. Not trying to gas you up. Seriously, that one was like, what are the chances of that actually happening? Like
literally a 1 in a million shot.
But then the fact that the kid passed out because he thought something like detached down there is even brings it to a whole nother level.
Dude. And I actually had this is on a not funny thing, but like, because a couple of my guys were like, dude, that is the most ridiculous. Like, why would you even think that? I'm like, well, one, you're 12 and you reach in your shorts. What are you going to think? But also,
you're in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
You just got shot down there. Like,
right. But like, no, I have a friend who was, he used to ride BMX, like pro, like big jumps and tours and stuff. And he landed on his handlebars once and did like tear things open. And so he's like, no, that's possible.
It's possible.
Like I've heard I know a guy who had that personal story himself. And so I'm like, no, I mean, there's a big difference between a paintball and a bike handle, but still, like that was brutal.
Honestly, the pain that he felt, he probably thought that's what happened. So,
yeah.
Hey, I probably would have thought the same thing.
Dude, I got my stuff blown to bits. Like, oh my gosh. Oh man, that was so good. But they did add a sign to that paintball course that says must wear pants.
You know, that's one thing I think is hilarious about youth ministry is like, we now have like basically created random rules and no one knows why, but there's a story behind every single one. Like there's stories now that I'm sure there's a sign in the church van that says, do not wave at random people. Do not, no crayons and paper allowed in the van. Like, and then 10 years from now, it's like, why do we have this rule? Well, you know, Johnny did.
Yeah. And that kind of stuff
you have to wear pants on the paintball course. Why?
Yeah. And without taking, without keeping the story that connected to it, you have no idea why. It's like I was watching.
It's the weirdest.
I was watching a thing where they were talking about like, you know, this lady grew up like cutting the edge off like a ham or something, you know, like cut the end off it every time. And she's like, why do you know? Finally, your husband's like, why do you do that? Like that's such a weird. You're just wasting like a pound of meat off the end of this thing. I don't know. Calls mom. Mom, why do we do this? I don't know. Your grandma always did it. Like calls grandma. Grandma, why do we do this? I don't know. My mom always did it. Call great grandma. Great grandma, why do we do this? Well, when I was, you know, a young lady, the stoves were smaller. The oven was smaller. And so that was the only way the whole thing fit. You had to cut the end off it so it would squeeze into the oven.
And now everyone's doing it for no reason.
Yeah, now everyone's doing it for no reason. It's like, oh, you gotta like pass on the why, otherwise, like you just end up with stupid traditions. But
exactly,
and knowing that some people, you know, especially like this generation, seems like to be the one who's always going to reject those things, you know, and be like, well, I'm not doing that. That's idiotic. Yeah. And so like I always tried to keep like, this is why we do this thing, because we had a kid go to the ER. This is why we do this thing, because we had a kid. And so like when I got hired at a previous church, they had left a kid, one of the youth pastors had left a kid. And I know you've had multiple stories like this on your podcast. The guy had left a kid in another state.
Yes,
they were crossing state lines,
too common.
stop at a truck stop. You know, everybody gets off the bus. It's a big tour bus. Everybody gets off they have multiple buses. I mean, there's a big youth ministry. So, you know, like 3-4 buses, all caravanning, and, you know, like 52 people on each bus. And one kid out of 200 got left behind at the truck stop because everybody on the buses did a head count. And then when they came up with the discrepancy, either two of the leaders counted again and said, no, I think we're good, and left, or they went, I'm pretty sure he's on the other bus. And
don't do that.
All of that kind of stuff. So we were like, here's the thing. You get a roster. These are the people. You call roll. Every time you get on and off that bus, you call roll. We do not leave until everyone confirms that every kid whose name is on the list is on the bus. Nobody switches buses at all for any reason. Where you're on the same bus, you will survive the trip. But we're not leaving people at the wrong place and turning a whole
Yes.
caravan of buses around to go pick you up because you didn't bother to come out of the bathroom on time. Like, so yeah, it was, but like every time until I shared that story,
Yeah.
the rule made no sense. And people were like, no, I don't know. I counted. And I'm like, no. The bus doesn't move. Go do roll call, man. We got
So here's a story that's going to be coming on the show at some point. This one is very unique, but also ties into that. There was a youth group, and this is why it's important to do roll call at the church or where you're leaving as well, even if you have the list.
Yeah.
They were running like Six Flags or something for like they did like it was like an event that went until midnight at the theme park sort of thing. So they went with like a bunch of kids on a bus. They had the clipboard of all the names so that they could do roll call when they left.
Yeah.
Turns out they still can't figure out who did this, but someone put a fake name on the chart to be funny. And they spent 3 hours. This is midnight that this started because they're doing roll call at midnight when they're about to go home. 2 or 3 hours at the park with the cops and the security trying to find this random kid that no one actually knew. They thought it was a guest. And they're just like, I guess we just have to leave. And no parent has ever called about that kid. No one. And also no one has fessed up like, oh, that was me. But that's also a reason why you want to make sure that everyone gets on the bus the first time too.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine, dude. Like, because yeah, there comes a time where it's like, okay, there's no explanation for this. We have no. But then even that, it's like, what's the policy that got missed there when you look at like you're responsible for kids. Like I will never forget like the weight of being a youth pastor and what it meant for parents to trust me with their kids when I was getting ready to take a bunch of kids to another country. And I think it was when. Trying to remember which trip. I don't know that it matters, but we were either headed to Africa or Ecuador, one of those. And we're getting ready for the trip. And the dad of one of our students like writes me this letter and he's just like, man, I was, Marine sniper, like all this kind of stuff. Like, and I have been under enemy fire. I have all of this stuff. And like when people, shoot at you, like you have all this crazy stuff coming your way. And, it's like knowing that people have your back and knowing what you're out there to protect while you're putting up with this. And so like part of his letter was about just the idea of, some of the like human attacks that come from just everybody criticizing the leaders of anything all the time. And spiritual attack. And then the rest of it was about like, like I'm trusting you to be like the CEO of this company to take my kids behind enemy lines and do all this stuff. And like, and he's like, I really like, I wouldn't trust anybody else, but like, I trust you. I've seen your character. I've seen the way you handle yourself. And I was like, dang, dude, like this is a big responsibility. Like
I better not lose this kid.
Yeah. There's like a soul and like a family and a history and a legacy attached to this person's life. It's not just like, oh yeah, whatever. So like we had a lot of stuff. We've got permission slips and everything else. And like, I've done Six Flags trips and things like permission slips and parental contact and emergency contact info. And like, how do you just have a random name on the roster that you don't like have any other info for? Like,
I wondered that
nobody
too.
ever asked about this or anything. Like, what rinky dink youth group setup do you have where you're just like taking anybody that put their name on a piece of paper? Like, you can't take kids with you. Oh my gosh. So anyway, that blows my mind. Like some of those things I just think, and I've had interns and leaders before where they would do stuff like that, just like, oh, I just grabbed the keys to one of the church vans and like piled my small group in the van tonight. And we drove to Sonic and had youth group over there. And I'm like, hold up, you what? Like, what if something happened and the mom shows up and I roll in and no one's in the classroom? Where you guys are supposed to be having small groups. Like, what are you kidding me? Like, you just left? Like, who's with you? I don't know. Just everybody from the group is in the. What if somebody showed up late and I just sent them off to wander the campus by themselves in the dark because I thought you guys were here? Like, what were you thinking?
Something that's one of the things that it wasn't like anything bad happened, thankfully, but something I ran into here is culturally the city I'm in, parental. How do I frame this? Supervision is really not a thing. So it's like you go to the kid's house and you're like, yeah, my mom said I'm fine. And then like you come to their house, or they come to your house for small group, and like I'm really intentional about like, hey, like we have parents' permission, like they
Yeah.
know who I am, I meet them all, and this is when I was doing youth ministry, and it's like they'll go from there, and then they'll just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna walk to my friend's house a mile away. I'm just like, no, 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 like you can't do that. Like we're going to your house, I'm dropping you off, and like honestly, what's crazy is the parents, not all of them, it's just the it's not inner city here, but it's a small city. The city here, it's like they would have been fine. They wouldn't have cared. Like
Right.
they like, yeah, they come home 10 o'clock. Like, yeah, they were at my house till 8. Who knows what they did until then? And it's like you actually like, even if the parents don't care, that will come back to bite you one day if you're
Yeah.
not careful.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like you said, like every weird rule has some legitimate happenstance
Mm-hmm.
behind it where it's like, we need to make sure that doesn't happen again because there's massive liability. And it's like, yeah, 20 out of 21 parents don't care, but it's that
Yeah.
21st one that ends your
That'll be the kid you
career in
lose.
ministry. Yeah, that'll be the kid you lose, or
That's I've heard that
that'll
story
be the
a
kid that
lot.
goes missing. Like, and dude,
Yes.
like, I mean, I had, like personal experience of like a girl I grew up going to school with, was kidnapped on the way to the bus stop, like in view
Oh,
of her parents. Like her parents saw the car pick her up.
that's
Like the
crazy.
house is looking at the bus stop, and
Uh-huh.
she was found. Like, I mean, I'm kind of old. This was in the '90s, early '90s, and I was in like fifth grade,
Mm-hmm.
and she was found like a few years ago. Like
That's
she
crazy.
walked out like as an adult, like
That's
finally
that's
escaped her
insane.
captors, and there's like books and everything. Like, and I'm like, that happened in my hometown. Like,
Yeah.
we all went to the same schools and everything, and like this is. I'm like that kind of stuff. There's no way I'm gonna be the last person who saw this person.
No.
Yeah,
And
like
it's fun to like get these stories and joke about it on a podcast when I read them, and it's like, oh, they found the kid, great, but like, dude, like you dodged a bullet. The biggest one I've this has happened multiple times that I've read stories is they lose the special needs kid, and
oh
the conversation wasn't as intense as the one you had the military dad, but it's like you had to not beg but really reassure those parents that like, no, like this kid, like it's his first outing, we're gonna have an eye on him, like we're gonna be totally fine, and that's the kid you lose. Like this is a parent
yeah,
you went over above and beyond to make sure they were gonna be safe, and then you lose that one. Man, I don't know what to tell you.
yeah. That kind of stuff is, I don't know, just anything with kid safety or and that kind of thing. I just think like, man, why aren't you guys where you're supposed to be? Or if something happens, like, like you never know, like the time that you guys go play hooky and we're all at the convention or whatever, and you guys played hooky and took off with your group without telling anybody in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the night, and you're not in the hotel room, and then somebody calls in a bomb threat or like there's a fire
Yeah.
and we're trying to get a
Uh-huh.
hold, and they're checking names and looking at people coming out, and
You're still
everyone's
in there.
freaking out, yeah, looking for you, and
Yeah.
y'all are down at Carl's Jr. 24-hour burger deal or something. Like, why were you not where you supposed to? Why did you tell
Yeah.
somebody? Like that kind of stuff, just basic. Like we need to know so we know where people
Yeah.
are, and that
Over
was
communication,
yeah
100%.
over communication. So what's man, there's so much good stuff from your podcast, but we've been chatting for a minute. So just real quick, my question is, what's the craziest one that you personally have experienced? As you share all these crazy stories.
Yeah, let me think for a second because there's some really good ones and I always like forget about them. But I think the craziest story, this was like really early that I
Mm,
read this. Um they were on a trip in a
mm,
couple of 15 passenger vans with kids in Washington D.C. and one of the kids got the bright idea to write on a piece of paper something along the lines of like help me or we're being
yeah,
kidnapped.
right.
And they put it up against the glass window. Youth pastor had no idea. He's
Mm,
just driving along in DC, which you don't play games in DC. Soon enough, there were like, I might butcher the story. You'll have to go back and
yeah.
listen. 3 or 4 black SUVs pull this caravan over, right? The 2 or 3. They yank the youth pastor out of the van at gunpoint, have him on the ground, and they're slowly like escorting the kids out of the back of the van.
Oh my
They start
gosh.
calling parents. They're like, hey, do you feel endangered? Like all this stuff. Youth pastor still has no idea what's going on. Took them like 2 or 3 hours to get it all sorted out. But that one is, I think that will always just be ingrained in my memory. And
The day I got
like
my
poor
youth
youth
pastor
pastor,
put on a watch list, like,
literally, poor guy did nothing wrong. It was some punk kid in the back that ended up
yeah.
nearly getting him shot.
So that is, yeah, that one. I've heard of. I've seen people share that kind of stuff and been like, we had all these people honking at us in the van, and then like look back and like come to find out like, no, my kid is in the third row of the van with this "help me" sign, in the back. Like, are you kidding me right now? But so what for you personally in youth ministry? Did you ever have any crazy experiences like that where something? Or have you like shared them and been like, I'm not telling anybody, but this one's actually mine?
So as I was like creating this podcast, I'm like, man, I've spent a lot of time in youth ministry. I grew up at a youth camp
Yeah.
for 13, 14 years. Like I have to have stories. I couldn't remember any, but as I was recording, some things started to come back into memory. The biggest one for me wasn't at in youth ministry. It was when we were working at the camp as I was a teenager. We brought this, there was this inner city African American group that came in, right? And the reason I say the culture is because they don't like the woods and they'll tell you that.
Right.
All right. So one of the things that the leader of the group, this is out in the boonies, this camp is, right? One of the things the leader of the group said was like, I want you to take these kids on a night hike and scare the living crap out of them. Like, I give you my permission. So me, my brother, and my two buddies are like, oh, bet. Like, we're going to go like have some fun. So we spent the afternoon preparing for this night hike. We scoped out like what trail we're going to bring down. It's going to last probably 35, 45 minutes. And this is going to be at midnight that evening. And we go out to the woods and we take knives. We start carving slash marks in trees, like massive slash marks. So we're going to stop here. We start putting we put like a little speaker in the woods, like a Bluetooth speaker to screech. We had one kid out there in the woods under like a bush or like a little tree right at the very end that he was going to start shaking it. So fast forward to that evening, we have probably 50 inner city kids out in the woods, leaders too. Like there's some adults, and it's dark, so like everything's heightened, right? They're already like, this has been the topic of camp for the week. Like they can't wait for the night hike. So they're like really on edge already. So we take them out, and we knew where all the stuff was in the woods. So the first one is like, whoa, we hold up our hand like this, right? And they're all, you just hear flashlights start flashing around the woods. And we're just like, this is fresh. And it's this huge gash mark in the tree. And my brother and I are leading the hike, and we're just like, we start to like pretend to be nervous, right? So like we have to get scared. So the hike continues, and another buddy was in the woods. He starts chucking like boulders down the hill. So you hear stuff crashing through it, and you just see the flashlight whip around, like 50 kids like thinking they're gonna get eaten alive. Continue. So they're like freaked out at this point. We get to the end of the night hike, and this is probably 200, 300 yards at the bottom of the hill from like the dining hall where we were all going to meet. And there was this little creek, probably like 6 feet wide, that we had to cross. So people were like slowly going across. And my brother, he yells, he's like, wait, did you guys hear that? And then everyone looks, and this tree probably 15 feet away starts shaking. And the entire group sprints through this creek up the hill. And you just see leaders grabbing kids like by the shirts, yanking them up the hill. I'm pretty sure like someone had like an asthma attack and had an ambulance called. Like it was like next level insane. They thought they were going to they were out.
No, I just lost my camera. Hold on.
So basically the youth leaders were grabbing these kids by the shirts. And I just remember seeing them like hauling them up the hill. And there was like a girl, pretty sure they had to call an ambulance because she had an asthma attack. Like it was like next level. And the funniest thing is like we technically weren't liable because we had permission to do it all. But I think that's probably my craziest story from youth ministry.
So the thing in the tree was still one of your friends?
Oh yeah. Like we knew where he was going to be. And I mean, if I went on that hike, I would have been scared. If I didn't know, like.
Yeah. So we're at, there's this place up in the mountains in Southern California where there's a like denominational camp, so it's where you go for summer camps, where you go for winter camps, where you go for leader retreats. And so all the college, it's college retreat and everybody's up there, and the assistant youth pastor, he goes up and puts on this like really janky bear suit, and he goes up the hill from the forest, and he's like coming down, and all the girls are like, and he's coming down, and he's like, yeah, roar, like he's like, this is so funny. They all think I'm a bear. They're like, oh my gosh, there's a bear, there's a bear. And they're like, who is that? Who is that? Jeff, there's a bear. There's a bear 20 feet past our buddy.
Oh my goodness.
Right on the hill. He doesn't see it.
The real bear's like, who's this? Oh, yeah.
So, just like, I was waiting for that. Like, then we're like right by the thing, and there's a bear at the door.
Bear. There probably was. I don't want to know the creatures out there that were watching us that night, but I am sure we were not alone.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's so good. All right, so one last serious-ish question before going. In all of that time, not funny, hilarious things, but what is, because like part of what sparked the idea for this, for my podcast was, stories and things, but just looking at how following Jesus, it's be rad for Jesus. Following Jesus is radically different and radically awesome. And so what's the most like awesome God moment you've seen or experienced all those years at camp, or, maybe it's just personal devotion, but like, where's one of those things where you're just like, man, I have, like the kind of thing where you read about in Acts where John and Peter are like, they're getting whipped, they're in jail, and they're like, you have to stop talking about Jesus. And they're like, yeah, you do what you want. We can't help but speak of the things we've seen and heard. And so like, what's your biggest radical God moment?
So for me, I think it has to be a couple physical healings, and one was recent, and it was so really important to me is like being athletic, playing sports and stuff. And we have a church softball team I was coaching this year, and I haven't played softball since high school. I mean, I played a couple years, but nothing intense, right? And I really was feeling some pain in my arm. And I knew it was like probably like a little slight tear in my elbow. And what was really scaring me is like Tommy John. I'm like, I'm not a pro baseball player. Like, I'm not going to go get surgery for this. And like, it was important to me to be healthy and not have pain and make something worse. And we were having a special service at our church, and they were praying for healing, and they didn't even have to lay hands. The preacher was right there. He was like, you know what, if you have pain in your body, the Holy Spirit's here right now. Like we're going to have healings tonight. And I was just like, you know what? It's been a while since I've really had a physical healing. I don't really get hurt often, but like this is something I know I feel the pain. Like I move my elbow and there's a twinge. And I know it's not good just from like playing sports my whole life.
Yeah.
And that night he prayed. I was like, man, I started stretching my arm. I was playing guitar actually. It's funny.
Yeah.
People probably saw it, but I started moving my arm. 100% healed since then. And it wasn't like, like a bone grew back or anything like that, but it was just something that I'm like, man, I knew that was God in the moment. The other time was actually at our camp. We had our church come down, and they were doing like just a youth camp service. And I had been throwing my back out pretty severely, just doing little things. Yeah. And I know exactly where the pain is, and got prayer, instantly healed. Actually, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I was instantly healed, but I have never had that pain again. I wasn't in pain in the moment, but I knew like, hey, this is trouble I have. I don't know if like something got realigned. I knew that in the moment, it's like, oh, okay, I felt something happening. Yeah. And have not had that back pain in that spot, dude, ever since. That was 5-6 years ago, which is incredible.
That's awesome. Yeah. And back pain's no joke. I used to kind of scoff at it. I remember a guy that worked at a church we were at, had back pain, and he threw out his back, and he like laid down in the street next to his car. Like he was getting out of his car, and it went out, and he just like laid down. He's like, I can't do anything else. Yeah. And somebody found him laying in the road. Like, you know, and I was like, what a wuss, just freaking get up already. Like what
That's
a
how
stupid
I talk
thing.
too.
Like, why are you being such a baby? And then I threw out my back, like tying my shoe. Yeah. And I was like laid out on the couch for like a week, just like, I can't breathe. Like, why does this hurt so bad? And I'm like, it's not even near my lungs. It's like lower back, like right above my hips. But I was like, everything, breathing hurts, looking hurts, talking hurts, like living hurts. Like nothing. I can feel my heartbeat in my spine. This is horrible. But so yeah, dude, that's awesome. And what an amazing and radical God we serve and know, who can make stuff like that happen easy.
The simplest, and even like the elbow pain. It's like, someone might look at that and be like, oh, it's like a little bit of elbow pain. I don't lie. Like I'm not gonna sit on here and do this for the sake of clout. Like I really have not had pain since that day, and the back,
that's awesome.
Like that's an incredible testimony itself. So
right,
yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. Like God, when you see that stuff happen in Scripture, God uses that as ways to Jesus is establishing his authority. People are being reassured that God really sees them and is doing something. It's a testimony of the greatness of God. And so those are absolutely, amazing things that we should speak of, the incredible, awesome power of our God. So, dude, thanks for sharing that with us. And thanks for being here on the podcast. This has been a lot of fun. I feel like I could just sit and hear stories like this and talk about it for hours on end. But I really appreciate your podcast. If people wanted to check out all of these things, any and all the things you want to plug, social media, your podcasts and whatnot, where can people find you?
The best place to look, and it will kind of lead to all the others, would be either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search Youth Group Chronicles. From there, that's our long form podcast audio. Eventually, we're working on it right now, getting a YouTube channel rolling. It's a lot of work, but it's coming. So you'll get to see all the crazy faces for an entire episode instead of a TikTok clip. And then you can just, on TikTok, I post to my personal page, Sam T. Moss. And then on Instagram, we post some reels on there. And that's just Youth Group Chronicles. So those 3 places are where you'll find the good stuff.
Is it Youth Group Chronicles or at YG Chronicles on Insta?
You're right. Yes, it is YG Chronicles.
Okay. I'm just thinking, I could literally, I could hear your voice from the podcast going at YG Chronicles.
Yep, you're right. You can tell it's been a while since I sat down and recorded some episodes. So YG Chronicles for Instagram, and then it's just my personal page on TikTok.
Yeah, no, it's all good, man. And I gotta say, I didn't call you out, but a couple episodes ago on my podcast, I put you on blast gently, but I just, because the way you guys talk about your merch, because you were like, some people, they just throw their logo on the merch, and I was like, dude, I love the name of our podcast. Like it's a thing I say to people.
Yours is awesome. I love that.
And so I put, but then it was literally like, as I was putting the merch together, I was listening to your podcast, and I'm getting the shirts loaded into a store that all say "Be Rad for Jesus." Some people just put the name of their podcast on the thing. We didn't do that. We put like things that you can wear anywhere. And I'm like, this is the thing I want people to wear. So
you're the exception to the rule. When I was looking at it, I'm like, it goes both ways, so it works.
No, for sure, it does. And yeah, some of the stuff, like, I'm like, I would never wear a shirt with like that podcast name where it's just like blah 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 podcast. Like, who cares? But
what really came to mind? It wasn't even like Christian podcast. It was because of my professional career. It's these tech companies will like throw their logos on this merch that they like send to customers. Yeah. And they'll send them like a t-shirt of like the SaaS tool you use or the software you're using. It's like, when would I ever wear this? Like, this is the most pointless customer gift ever. So that's actually where I got it from. That's funny. You're the exception to the rule, don't worry.
No, it's all good, dude. I will say though, the best web design, because I do web and graphic design too, but like probably not as cool. So, but there was a WordPress development company out there for a while called Flywheel, and like back in the day. And they sent out shirts. If you signed up with them I didn't even like pay for something. I don't know why, like what I did to get the t-shirt, but they sent me a package with a bunch of marketing stuff. And one of them is a shirt that I still wear. I've had it for probably 15 years. And it says designers are fly. And like says it all huge. And then on the back, it just has their little Flywheel logo, like real small centered in the shoulders. And I'm like, that is the best freaking like random marketing shirt ever. Cause I'm like, heck yeah, they are. Look, I'm fly. And it just says fly. Like that's the biggest part. It's like huge kind of chalk cursive letters. And I'm like, that was one of my favorite shirts when I could fit into it. I've grown since then. But anyway, man.
Life, right?
Yeah. Hashtag dad life. Don't fit. Wearing a different size than I used to. Well, and at the time I was into like the hardcore band, like wearing this medium, You know, you gotta
the tight, like the tight shirts.
Yeah,
No, I
the
get
overly
it.
small, like looking at guys with like a gut like twice as big as me, going like, yeah, just give me a small. I'm like, you don't wear a small, bro. But anyway, dude, Sam, thanks so much for being on here, man. I'd
Absolutely,
love to
man.
do this again sometime when you get some more crazy stories under your belt.
Absolutely. Hit me
And
up whenever you want. Yeah.
yeah, man, I'll look forward to hearing the next episodes of YG Chronicles, because it is a dope podcast and definitely encouragement and just fun to listen to and laugh at the hilarity that ensues. So
Absolutely, man. Thanks for the
Awesome,
invite. Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
yeah, bro. Okay, that's it for this week's episode of the Be Rad for Jesus podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've stuck around this long, you either hate us so bad you want to find out where to complain, or you really loved it and you want to come back for more. I want to tell you how to do that. You can go to beradforjesus.com. And we have links to everywhere you can stream and subscribe to our podcast. We have episodes, we have show notes, all on there. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. And if there's another platform that we don't offer yet, hit us up on the website and let us know where you listen to podcasts. If you do enjoy the podcast, would you consider leaving us a review, leaving us a rating, sharing it with a friend, posting it on social media, or even going above and beyond and supporting this podcast? Help us make more episodes of this podcast, because caffeine definitely fuels just about everything we do, almost as much as the Holy Spirit and our love for Jesus. Be rad for Jesus, because following Jesus is radically different and radically awesome.